Okay, welcome to Serial for July 2023. So like every month, I will be going over photos I took or I edited last month. It's going to be a little bit longer this time because I was at the Arles Photo Festival, which is named Rencontres de Arles, which is in south of France. A pretty big festival. And the first week is the pro week where lots of things happen. So the first two pictures are from Arles. And here for the festival, I took my Leica M 240. It's an M mount camera, rather old now, with the Summerit M series of lenses, which are all f2.5 and have a really interesting rendering, in my opinion. Quite modern bokeh, really precise rendering and geometry. And here I kind of liked the image basically on the left. That's Arles. There's lots of posters on the walls. They get ripped off and ripped away, and there's some tags and whatever. And you get some really interesting patterns. Or if you wait a little bit for the night to come down, you get some really interesting ambiances. The problem with the M240 here on those two pictures, you don't really see it, but the sensor is not that sensitive in low lights, and we'll see in other pictures later. Those two next pictures, that's still the same equipment, but using the 50mm Summerit on the left and the 35mm on the right. Definitely the same kind of looks. It's a really interesting family of lenses Leica used to make. They were on the cheap side, but I think the rendering is really very modern. I really enjoy it. And the greens always come out really nice. And here the sensor is perfectly fine. The M240 is known for its quite punchy colors, and some actually really like it better than other M bodies from Leica. Here those two pictures, with lights going down, that's what I was saying before. It gets harder to have something without noise or without motion blur. So you really have to be more aware of keeping your hand still. And here on the left, that's during this Arles festival, you have lots of parties. Obviously, people come here for the photography, but in the evenings, many pros on the first week. So there's lots of events going on. On the left, that's one of the main sites in the central part of the festival. And on the right, that's coming out quite early in the morning, I guess, from the MIOP house, where the MIOP agency house, where they had a big exhibition, but they had also a party going on the night. But I kind of liked those ambiances with those two photos. The next two photos, again, this is something I find interesting. I've talked about it in previous episodes. I kind of like those older sensors because when you push them, you get a very specific grain, like you would maybe with some films, and you get really some characteristics that are linked to the way they manage color and how it brings out on the M240, for example, the magentas and the greens, and you can get some really interesting characteristics to the pictures you take. But you really need to know a little bit more about your sensor. And here, I kind of like those two pictures because it's the same place. If you look at it, both were made with the 35mm Summerit M lens, and on the left, that's, if you see on the far left, that's the same street, except by night and end of day. Next two pictures, again, the same equipment in terms of camera. The 90mm on the left, that's a photo with Wim Wenders, who was presenting an exhibition of Polaroid photos he had taken during the filming of one of his films. And I kind of liked the ambiance of this picture where everybody's trying to take a picture of him, and you have some kind of symmetry with people wearing the same hats and some holding even Polaroid cameras, SX70s, as you can see in the middle there. I kind of like this multiple way of reading this picture. And on the right, that's definitely what I was telling you about before, how in lower lights you get the greens, the cyans, the magentas that come out from the lower lit parts of the picture when you push them up, and that gives some character. It's not as smooth as with a modern camera that can go really high in ISOs without much noise. The whole Arles week was with this M240 camera and those lenses. So here it's both with the 90mm Summerit M. Kind of liked the overall feel of those two pictures, details of the Arles streets. And here on the left, that's M240, so a digital camera with the Smart M50mm f2.5, 2.5. And on the right, that's film. That's film, but with a modern film from Kodak, the Pro Image 100, and using the Olympus PEN F camera. It's a half frame camera. It's a 40mm f1.4 lens. That's basically the lens I've used for this film, the whole film. And basically with this half format film, pictures, you will have 72 pictures on a 36 picture roll, usual 36 24 by 36 film. Except here it's half frame, so you basically have 18 by 24 millimeter sized pictures on the negative, which is actually interesting for me because I almost always work in portrait and not landscape format. But yeah, really a nice rendering. It's interesting how close both are. Maybe the film has much punch to it. But here, if you look at the two next pictures, here I'm going towards the pen. That's still the Pen F half-frame camera. Same lens, Pro Image 100. I kind of like the rendering of this lens. This kind of swirly bokeh behind, but good details in the camera. It's a really nice bokeh in any case. The color rendering is great, good geometry. And these are details from my Arles trip. The two next pictures on the left, that's I took this camera, this Pen F camera, to Belgrade in Serbia, and that's a detail. Just I found it interesting to have this. The focal plane that's in focus is quite front, so you can see the grass is in focus. The sign up left is in focus, but then everything kind of fades away, and you have this huge pond. Actually, it's inundated. It's a road that's been obviously not taken care of as well as it should have. And the bridge above is the bridge that on the left will go above the Sala River. But I kind of like this composition. And on the right, same thing, the focus not exactly where it should be, but actually I think it is, because you kind of see the people. It gives it a sense of movement with those friends going towards a cafe. And yeah, the interesting rendering of the Pro Image 100 film. The next two pictures, again, same equipment, same film, just to show this picture. That's back to Arles for both pictures. On the left, that's during one of those nights, party nights in Arles. I kind of liked the artificial lighting and still some sunlight in the background. It's basically already night, but you still have some blue coming in between the leaves. And yeah, the ambiance in one of the streets of Arles. I think it works pretty well. It's a very pleasant experience to use those half-frame cameras. It's a reflex camera, and yeah. The two next pictures, I tend to like to push my films or sensors either in low lights or highlights. Film is way more resistant, but here I went a little bit too far. And while it's not really my style, I usually like to have lots of details in highlights. I found those two pictures, I did a few like this, interesting because you really have this highlight, this kind of really saturated highlights, give you a sense of the warmth and the power of the sun while I was there. The reality was more like this than if I had kept and preserved some of the details of the highlights. Here on the left, one last picture with the same equipment, and again those highlights. I did quite a few on this film, but just to preserve and intensify the idea that the sun is really strong. And this picture is not in Arles, it's in Geneva, on a terrace, on a cafe. One of those cafes that hasn't been yet invaded by expats or tourists, so it's kind of local and pretty young, and it's really cool, the real Geneva. On the right, that's completely different equipment. I just have one picture I've selected for this week, but I've shown some pictures of this camera in the past. It's a Balda Super Baldax. It's a foldable camera from the old times. And here it's using Arsimago film, 120 film. And actually it's just rebranded. Arsimago is a shop that's in Zurich and in Rome or Milan, I forgot. And there's lots of stuff, interesting films, interesting cameras and equipment. And that's basically, the film is basically FOMA RetroPan 320. rebranded. And here the camera has an 80mm f2.8 ENA lens, and it's on 6.6, except I cut it a little bit in post-prod. But I really like the rendering of those trees. Really, the character of the lens comes out pretty well here. Going back to Arles with the M240, it's a little bit of a back and forth in this series, but I didn't want to have all the Arles photo together, kind of boring. And that was the Summit M 90mm. Both pictures are in the Luma Tower, this tower built by Frank Gehry, which has a discussable architecture. I'm not a big fan personally, but I know that people are kind of split. Some are really in favor, some really don't like it. It's quite phallic. It's quite huge. I'm not sure it makes sense where it is, but nonetheless, the view is really nice from the top. And what I liked is Gehry had made quite some work in trying to bring matters and the materials used and the colors and that to be integrated in the environment and the local senses. Except it's a huge tower in the middle of nowhere. But I thought this gave a good idea of why the colors kind of work out. In that sense, it's pretty well done. And anyways, if you're able to travel there, it's an interesting site to go see. Here we completely switch on something else in terms of equipment. That's using the SL2 camera, the Leica full-frame camera, and using a very cheap lens, which is the Astrory portrait lens, 50mm f2. It's basically between 50 and 100 euros. It's really cheap to buy. And that's a historical bridge that's being reholed. I thought the picture was kind of interesting. Not that much, but yeah, still. And gave a good idea also of the aberrations, the chromatic aberrations in real highlights, as you can see on the right. It's basically the two sides of the same place at the same time. But yeah, interesting nonetheless in terms of geometry and rendering. We'll see more pictures of this equipment a bit later. Switching back to something else. Here, that's photos. These are photos I took for a video that's already come out, I believe. I've had a lot of requests asking me how to invest in some equipment when you don't have the equipment and want to go towards manual photography, manual focus photography. And I wanted to show that probably the best thing to do is to invest in the lenses and not the camera at first. I really love my good cameras, but here, for example, it's an Olympus PEN EPL1 camera. It's a micro-four-thirds. Secondhand, it's really cheap. I bought it at a negligible price, basically free. And you can adapt with adapters. You can adapt Leica M mount lenses, for example, and that was the idea here. And I'm using the same family of lenses that we've seen before. I was using in Arles, the Summit M. I kind of like the idea because you can kind of compare also the rendering. And besides the fact that the sensor is really small with micro-four-thirds, you basically have to double the focal length. So the 50mm that's used here on both pictures is basically a 100mm f2.5 when it's adapted. And yeah, I think the rendering really preserves the quality of the lens. And those lenses, if you don't like it, you can always sell them. You won't lose money. You might actually even make some money on some of them, depending on the price you've paid. So I think it's an interesting thing. Here again, the same equipment with the 50mm Summit M on the left, the 35mm Summit M on the right. It works. So it's basically 100mm and 70mm. But good color rendering. The two next pictures. Same equipment for the camera, and this camera is really fast. You turn it on, you can take a picture. You have the ergonomics are really good. You could actually adapt lenses that are made for it with autofocus, but I mean, if you want to invest in something manual, you might as well try some of those manual lenses, and this camera is perfectly fit. And here, that's with the Chroma double glass f11 focus-free lens made from a small artisan. That's I really like that lens. So it's basically a 48mm equivalent here. Yeah, besides to have some grain when the lights become a little bit low because it's not the latest generation sensor, but total pleasure to use. I will actually personally use it in the future. Here, same thing. You can see on the left the grain I was talking to you about. Definitely comes out pretty strong. But with this focus-free lens, actually I'm not looking where I'm shooting. I'm driving, and just when I think it's interesting, I just shoot a few shots in the right direction and hope for a good composition. It's another way to take pictures. Here, those two pictures, again, same equipment with the 75mm Summerit M on both, just to give an idea of the color rendering, bokeh, and geometry, which is great on those lenses. So it's basically a 150mm lens here. And here, same thing again. And again, also, you get this color distortion and highlights, which you can get rid of in post-prod. But here for the example, I actually have this very focused video about it. If you're interested, go check it out. I'll talk more about the details. Oh, and sorry, here again, the same equipment, but with the 35mm Summerit M on both sides. On the left, it's Geneva, the Rhone River, Terrasse, and on the right, it's somewhere on the what we call the border of Rösti. It's where in Switzerland, on one side they speak German, on the other side they speak French. It's quite blurry in the middle. Here I'm more on the German side, but I kind of like that composition and give a good idea of the low light rendering of this camera with those lenses. Here we're switching back to something else, going back to a Leica SL2 camera, and I'm using here a lens that a lot of people are talking about right now. It's the Speed Panchro 2 by Light Lens Lab, and it's a 50mm f2. It's supposed to give you the rendering of one of those old lenses, the equivalently named lens from last century. I don't know, it's a little bit, there's some diffusion. I kind of like it. Maybe the color's a little bit cold. Not sure it's the lens or, I don't know. But here's those two next pictures, same equipment. I actually like the diffused looks in the leaves and in the contrasty parts of the image. And the bokeh is definitely really nice, very smooth. And there's quite some PK in the middle of the picture, so very specialized lens, I guess. Let's look at the two next pictures. Same thing here in low lights. But the bokeh is really nice geometry too. I think it's a lens that can be used for very specific things, but it's quite powerful from what I see here. And here again, the two next pictures, they're in lower light situations. Works pretty great, even so it's f2. It's kind of fine and can really give some character to her pictures if you like that kind of character. Yeah, two more pictures with the same equipment in the mountains. Yeah, maybe a little bit cold on the color side, maybe a little bit lack of reds, but anyways, I'm not doing an objective analysis here, and it'll be the focus of a specific video about this lens in the future. Going back to something else, film, black and white. That's Cine Still XX, 400 ISO, I believe. Using a camera that really surprised me, the Olympus XA1. It's an f4 locked, automatically managed diaphragm, but it's focus free and really very surprised. That's a camera I will definitely use again. Hassle-free. Here's the two next pictures, same thing. The previous pictures were in Arles. The one on the left here is in Arles. On the right, it's somewhere in Switzerland. Really nice rendering, both in black and white and color. Here on the left, same camera, Cine Still XX on the left, and using Kodak Color 100 on the right. Same place, different composition, but yeah, it works. Quite an infallible camera, I felt. But I have the video came out recently. You can go see it. I talk about it a little bit more. Yeah, really nice Inal again here, a portrait mode photo using this equipment. Really interesting, in my opinion. Here we're going back to the Arles lens we've seen with the bridge, and that's in the forest. I'm working on a video about it, and I thought that would be interesting. A few shots I really liked coming out of this lens. Here again, I think for the price of the lens, its rendering is really interesting. It's got some character, really nice. Again here, real nice bokeh, good geometry, works well. Maybe a little bit desaturated in terms of colors, but really nice. And here's the two last pictures. That's using the Leica M240 I was working with earlier. That's in Geneva, and it's with a new lens I'm working on, which is a TT Artisan 90mm f1.5. I think I'm going to like this lens. It's really shallow depth of field for a 90mm. It's pretty cheap in terms of cost, and I really like the first shots I've done with it, and those are two of them, which I think are very promising. So hopefully that was entertaining, and yeah, don't hesitate to comment, to react, and ask questions and propose other subjects, and catch you next time.